maybe
3 hours. Oh my god. Hey guys, we're live. Real Red Morning, Carl, me, social signaling. There's your introduction. I am surprised you're doing well this morning, though. I can tell when you're
I'm
drunk
always doing
posting on Twitter because you actually put out tweets more than like 3.
Yeah, well, I don't get hangovers, funnily enough. I'm not sure if that's like an adaptation because I'm from a long line of drunks or what's going on.
I thought it was just practice because that's always how I did it. If I get a bunch of drinks in me over like an extended period of time, I can take it fine. But if I do like a month-long cut and then I try to have a vodka, it just kills me the next morning. So I figured you were going to be down for the count because what was your cut? You just did one like a 6-weeker or something, didn't you?
Yeah, 6 weeks. It was fine, though. It's, funnily enough, I'm not feeling too bad. It could be because my blood alcohol level is still about 0.3.
You mean 0.03 or 0.3?
0.03. I actually bought one of those testers to have at my house.
Oh, the little breathing ones?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Have that out for like party favors.
Well, I've actually done that before, like gone around the party with it because people think it's hilarious to be like, then blowing it and then, oh shit, I'm getting bloated. Can I have another drink?
I remember there was a strip club in Calgary, Alberta called the French Maid, and they actually had like a breathalyzer thing right by the door. You would just bring whatever straw you were using for your drink and blow into the thing, and it would let you know if you were okay to go home. And I'm just going, there's just something about the flavor of Alberta. I can't even describe it. It's kind of the way Texans talk about Texas, the way Albertans talk about Alberta. Never mind, too, that for their strip clubs, they always have like loony games. So you're basically throwing change at the girl on the stage and they set up like little games. So it's almost like a bit of a carnival thing, too. That's French Maid, guys, if you get a chance, if it's still open after COVID.
Like, I've been to a strip club in Quebec, but I've never been to one in Alberta.
Club Super Sex?
I think that might have been it, yeah.
Was there a dude at the front door who was like, looked like he had a knife wound on his eye? Big,
I
fat,
don't remember.
mafia-looking
This
dude?
was fucking 15 years ago.
Oh, fair enough. Chances are, though, everybody who goes there, it's Club Super Sex. It's where all the basic training facility is in Saint Jean Retno, which is like 45 minutes out of town. So that's where everybody ends up. And there's always one guy from the platoon who talks about his $5 hand job in the back from some, I don't want to say it's illegally traversed Russian immigrants, but I'm just saying the mafia's got ties to that place. It's good times.
Yeah, kind of reminds me of this dude I know who went to Thailand with a bunch of work buddies, and he ended up paying a ladyboy for sex, but he didn't know it was a ladyboy. And they asked him what happened, and they asked him the next morning, "Hey, what happened last night?" He said, "Well, if I paid for it, I paid for it."
Hey, you know what? You might as well own it. Dude, that Thailand, man. I don't know what it is about Phuket. Everybody talks about Bangkok, but I swear Phuket is the much better place. Even after Patong Alley burned down and came back again. Which I don't know which one you've done.
Well, Thailand even legalized weed now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so there was like this, I saw this article in like a medical journal where they legit have the prison chefs doing food with weed in it for the hospital patients.
Good for them. I guess we should tie this into the topic though. So we're talking social signaling for the audience. I put out a thing. Jeffrey Miller was talking about the social signaling theory, which is a fairly robust evolutionary psychology concept. If you don't know what it means, it just means if people are doing something and it looks like they're acting completely like ridiculously and it makes no sense what they're doing, it has costs, then chances are there's a social signaling aspect. And fundamentally, it's about dudes peacocking for chicks. It's basically the ultimate peacock. I think that's a fair assessment, isn't it?
Yeah, and you have this whole thing with you have real signals, you have fake signals, and then people imitate the real signals to gain social status by accident. And it kind of ties into what we were talking about earlier before we went live about the buckethead theory.
Oh, yeah.
It's like I've had some cases where I'm not necessarily against everything TradCons stand for, But at this point, they could be like, "Hey, we want to stop children from taking heroin." I would be like, "Fucking give children heroin. I want more. I want compulsory heroin at lunch during recess for kindergartners."
Yeah. Well, and that's the part that's most annoying about it. So TradCon, if you really want to talk about a traditional conservative family unit, dad went and worked out on the farm. Mom stayed home and got pregnant as much as she possibly could. He aches every morning. He drank so he could sleep at night. She eventually bought a dishwasher, so she had nothing to do all day. So she starts taking Quaaludes. Occasionally they'll have a fist fight between the two of them. Like, that's traditional married life. But they stick together because the instant one of them leaves, the kids or the wife will starve to death. And so you just don't do that. Plus, the preacher will like excommunicate you. So everybody has to keep it together somewhat. These guys are treating it like a lifestyle choice. I think actually there's this chick on Twitter, hilarious. So I talk about the sun hat goddesses. She talks about like tradconning as a verb. She calls it churning the butter, churning butter. And I like that. I'm gonna roll with that one.
Well, I just think it comes down to that. I think social media made that whole signaling thing worse because we've always kind of done it, but now we're doing it on steroids.
Oh, yeah, it's amplified. Everybody always has to one up everybody. Yeah.
It's kind of like, I thought it was kind of funny with the manosphere, especially because you started with, hey, just get yourself laid, own a decent pair of jeans, and clean your fucking room.
Yeah.
And you kind of end up with, if you don't have a Lambo by the time you're 14, you're a fucking failure at life. You're never going to get laid ever.
Well, not just a Lambo. You have to be 6 foot. I think it was like 6'8" now. 6'8" with a 16-inch dick and 6-figure salary. Never mind that's somewhere between 100,000 and 900,000, which is orders of magnitude different as far as lifestyle is concerned. But that's how it works. Yeah.
I would say income doesn't really start until you're over like $250K a year.
Yeah, I can go with that. Makes sense.
That's where I would argue that, the main 6-figure difference kicks in, because like if you're making 100 grand, your lifestyle isn't that far off someone who's making, let's say, 75 grand.
No, not at all. Yeah, pretty much. Maybe an extra trinket every month or two, or one more vacation, essentially.
And of course, it depends on the tax system too, how hard it hits you and when it hits you. Because let's say when you go let's say you put a progressive tax system where let's say you have a base rate of about 25% on everything and you have a high base deductible.
Right.
And then once you make, let's say if you make 50K, you pay those 25%. If you make 75K, you pay, let's say 27.5%. And if you make 100K, you pay 30%.
Is that just for you like an across the board progressive tax, or is it, because I know in Canada, it's the first 18 grand is tax free. The next up to like 50 grand, I think it is, you're paying 20 something percent. And then for every piece of income above that, you're paying like 30 something percent. Are you just averaging it out, or do some places do it that way?
I just simplified it.
Oh, fair enough.
I think most places do it the way Canada does it. It was just one of those simple things where the difference between, let's say, 75K and 100K isn't that huge in terms of how much you're left with every month, just on the basis of taxes.
Oh, 100% agree.
But once you start to get into that 250 grand, yeah, you pay a lot more in taxes, but you have a lot of additional raw income.
Uh-oh.
So, well, that was funny.
Yeah, finish your thought here. I'm going to get to this once you're done.
Well, the point was just that once you get up to a certain level of income, the additional income units are so much bigger in orders of magnitude that it just goes into a much different lifestyle.
Yeah.
Because that's the point. Let's say you pay 40% on $1 million, you're still left with 600K.
Right.
If you pay 30% on 100, you're only left with 70.
Which was the argument for progressive taxes, is that it hurts lower income people less than higher income people. It's been the case for it. Whether you agree with it or not, it doesn't matter.
The whole point of it was just that the whole 6-figure thing, like you said, if you make 100 grand, okay, fine. If you make 900 grand, that's a whole different ball game.
Yeah. And I think it's just spinners on your cars. The only people that are impressed by spinners on your car, if you guys don't know, that's the hub, like the rims that spin. Those only impress people who don't own nice cars. People who own nice cars find them gaudy. People who make $100,000 a year don't think $100,000 a year is impressive. People who make $30,000 a year think it's impressive. Although we'll take a break here because Irish Alpha has got this awesome 20 euro super chat. The actor Oliver Reed once found himself on a TV panel with a bunch of militant feminists, a few scotches in equipped. I'm all in favor of women's movements. I hate it when they just lie there. Yeah, they probably screeched at him for a while, I'm guessing. I don't know that one, though. Is that on YouTube, maybe?
You heard this one? But I still like the Peter Lloyd one, where he had that debate and he was like, sticks and stones may break my bones, but anything will trigger a feminist or something.
Oh. Dude, we shouldn't have lost Hitchens so early. I would have actually liked to see him go up against the SJW mob, because I have a feeling he'd have probably been on board for a while until it was very obvious that they were going the route of insanity.
Oh yeah, Hitchens was kind of that dude, though.
Yeah, I think he took Mark Twain's advice seriously about once you find yourself in the majority, it's time to reassess your opinion.
Yeah, I kind of agree with that one. It's kind of like that whole thing with Israel where they have like the rule of the 10th man, that if like 9 people in like their defense council thinks the same about something, it's the obligation of the 10th man to disagree with them and act as if they're all wrong.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of amplified, and a lot of the chosen ones have taken that attitude and amplified that signal to the extremes, and that's where you get absolute like monstrosities of contrarian views.
I think that's kind of the problem, though, is that you can kind of take contrarianism to an extreme level.
Mm-hmm.
And when people start building their identity around anti-signaling, because it's all about that identity, right? The reason why someone's an extreme contrarian is just because they want to feel like they're in the minority who's much smarter than everyone else.
Yep. Typical. And they call peak Redditor. Absolute peak Redditor. Everybody else is stupid but me. I'm brilliant and nobody understands me. And I'm going to put a manifesto on YouTube. It kind of actually, what it kind of reminds me of is, you remember like emo and goth kids? I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
How they were always like, they don't want to fit in, but then they made essentially just a separate group and everybody dressed the same way there. The only difference was which group they signaled to. And I'd argue it's because those guys can't compete. Like Valley Girls got their own little clique. The frumpy 4 out of 10 girl can't compete, but you throw some black lipstick and a Marilyn Manson album onto her, she has a chance. She has a chance to compete with the girl with the shit hanging off of her face, you know? Which I'm pretty sure is why we have contrarian signaling. Can't fire me, I quit.
Ultimately, it just kind of boils down to people pretending something instead of actually doing it.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of,
and it's
like,
easy.
The whole idea of having a fake Rolex watch is to signal that you're richer than you actually are. Mm-hmm. But the people who are really rich generally don't wear Rolexes.
Well, that's what I'm thinking. I don't think those people want to signal to the people who actually own Rolexes. I think they're signaling to the people that don't own Rolexes but aspire to. It's actually a great article by The Last Psychiatrist. You know, I'm a huge fan of his, where he talks about Jacques Cartier watches. And it's like, who is this for? It's trying to sell you on the idea of legacy. But people who actually have legacies and that estates, they're told what to like at boarding school. So they don't need ads to tell them this shit. So it's people that aspire to be. They think of themselves as disenfranchised nobility. They love these signals. Which is why upper middle class is such like a cutthroat, like status conscious group. Hence Karen. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I had a discussion with a buddy of mine who's he's not like disgustingly rich,
mm-hmm.
but he has enough money that he hasn't worked the last 20 years and he has no plans of working for the next 20.
I could ride this for 40 years minimum. Good for you, sir.
Well, he just kind of worked because he's quite financially savvy. He's an old investment banker. And his take was, I know exactly what it costs to run my family in this neighborhood. And when I look at what our neighbors are doing, they have the same fixed costs we do, but they fly off on vacations like 5 times a year.
Right.
how can they afford that? Because I know for sure that they're not making above this level of money. So it has to be debt finance consumption. And I think that's the trap of like the middle slash upper middle class. It's that,
Conspicuous consumption, man.
well, it's the social signaling via consumption that you can't really afford to have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's
And
the whole advertising industry too is geared towards tickling that itch or scratching that itch. Fear of missing out.
Personally, I just don't see much of the point in it. But then again, it's kind of hard to sit here and argue that you think social signaling is retarded when you've written 2 books on social signaling.
Well, it's not that it's retarded. It's the way it's manifesting in a lot of places is self-destructive. I think that would be a more accurate way of putting it. Like I'll use an example here. Diversity is our strength. Absolute social signal, because everybody who talks about like being woke that way, some of the most racist, bigoted people you ever meet. It's like a meme. Male feminists are basically one sexual assault accusation away. But that's the social signal. It's saying we could bring in like all the third world here and all the problems it's going to cause, and none of it affects me. So I can cheerlead it on. Like I have enough value that I can handle it. And that's like ultra rich people, because they're not like, you're bringing in plumbers. You're not bringing in Jeff Bezos, or he's not having Carlos Slim come in and take over Amazon. But that's the problem. Like you said, with fake signals, you get some guy who works as a paralegal or just a general office position. He is going to get displaced by an H-1B worker, but he still signals that stuff, hoping to like get into that higher echelon. But that's the problem. It doesn't work that way. You can signal as hard as you want, and you're not going to get into Jeff Bezos land.
Yeah, because it's not once you get up to that level, the people understand what those social signals are. Mm-hmm. So they signal it outwards, but they practice differently in private. Yeah.
But which is probably why they're so rich, because they're very smart that way and self-assured.
But the people who buy into like the public image, hook, line, and sinker, they're going to think I have to be like this person, both privately and outwardly. Mm-hmm. It's kind of like the same thing. Like Warren Buffett has done a great job cultivating himself as the nice grandpa from Omaha. Mm-hmm. But you don't become like the third richest man in the world if you're not ruthless.
That's what I've always wondered. Like, what's his Michael Jordan moment? You know how Michael Jordan did that same thing? He was always like the most well-spoken, kindest black man you ever did. But then off stage, he's like, he like, get out of here, kids, unless you buy my sneakers. I don't want to see you. Dropping N-bombs on guys on the court and shit. And he was just ruthless. I can just imagine Warren Buffett's like, get these Negroes out of my coffee house. Like, what the hell? He's old enough. You know he does.
Oh, of course. Like every guy over like 60 drops an N-bomb here and there.
Yeah. But the Sphere does it so well. Like I only fuck 9s and 10s is my go-to example for that. Because girls don't care if you fuck 9s or 10s. As a social signal, girls get jealous when a sexually available girl is there. Like, Rolo, he just put out a tweet about that chick, that mom who started an OnlyFans. And then a bunch of the dads in the school system found it and were like signing up for it. So all the chicks in the neighborhood got her kids expelled from school. Do you know this one or no?
No, I never heard about it. But it seems sensible because like girls don't really care if you cheated on them with a 9 or with a 3. They care that you cheated on them.
Yeah, that you embarrassed them publicly by cheating on them. But that's the thing for the social signal there. So everybody thinks I only fuck 9s and 10s. Well, if that's not going to help you get more girls or better girls or longer relationships or shorter one, what's the purpose of it? It's obviously to impress other dudes. And I can't think of anything more homoerotic than taking our instinct to social signal and use it to try and attract men. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's sort of gay.
Yeah, sort of. But I swear to God, and then they'll double down on it. You make that point, and well, you're only saying that because you're with the 4. I'm like, it doesn't really matter. But it
kind of reminds me of that. You've seen Office Space. I think it's Office Space. It's one of those like 90s comedies where one guy is like, everyone's a little bit gay. When you watch porn, do you want to see like a dude with a small little limp dick fucking her? Or do you
Oh,
want to see a guy with a huge throbbing cock?
no, that was a stand-up. What was this guy's name? He's got like a Texas accent, and I can't remember.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah,
I
it's
can't remember
Ron
his name.
White. Ron White.
Ron White? Okay, that's the one. Yeah, I remember that because he makes the joke that like, oh, I don't like seeing like tiny cocks in my porn. I like big fat one. He kind of just looks like you're gay, dude. The guy's fuck you, man. But yeah, in the sphere, if guys would stop worrying about signaling socially and start worrying about their own happiness or contentment, I think within 5 years we completely clean it out with guys who've got their shit together and moved on. But that's the problem, is that guys don't want to move on. Guys want to fit in, and guys want to win in their little social circle. And I can't think of another more embarrassing hierarchy than to be like the king of the PUA pile, or the king of the red pill pile, or the king of the black pill pile, you know?
Yeah, I know what you mean. It's like being the king of the manosphere is sort of like owning a bankrupt business.
Yeah. Being the most popular guy in the emergency ward. Out of
It's
all
like
the
being the
sick guys
CEO
here,
of
I'm
your
the top
one.
tier.
Yeah, it's like being the CFO of your own company with one employee, and you're
Oh
not
yeah.
even then you're not the CEO.
And King's
That
right,
was
but
a
you do
thing
get
for a while
groupies.
too, though. Like the so back when you had that trend with everyone supposed to be like a business owner,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone was just like, "Yeah, I started my own company, and now I'm the CEO." How many employees do you have? One? Well, zero technically.
But and then King A here saying, but you do get groupies. And have you seen the Spheres groupies? We don't exactly. they Mexico isn't sending us their best. I'll just leave it there. So far, the most pleasant people in the sphere are girls who like accidentally got here because they accidentally responded to some MGTOW guy, and now they're swarmed with male followers, and they're confused as fuck. Those are the only ones that are even like decent people. But even then, girl's gonna
No,
girl.
well, you have to say like the female groupies in the sphere, not to trash talk. It's sort of like the talent at a strip club at noon on a Wednesday.
But hey, you know what? If you're not able to compete in the dating world, if you're not top tier Tinder, top tier girl who gets hit on during the day, or the office flirt, then yeah, this bunch of guys who are like desperate to get laid, hey, at least you're king of something. King of shit
Yeah, you
mountain,
know,
sure, but still king, I guess.
and that was kind of why you got a lot of the girls got here because they're kind of over the hill and they've passed the wall, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And they kind of realized, hey, we have a bunch of dudes over here with jobs who are signaling traditional values. We should go over there and start signaling traditional values too.
To attract one,
And
yeah.
then maybe we'll get a husband.
And it works. Like I'm not doubting that it works. I've seen way too many 28-year-old women who are like, yeah, I don't like my job. I'd rather bake bread all day for a couple years, and then they'll get bored of that, and then all the problems start. And that's one of the big problems I find with social signaling, is that it doesn't have, like, it's a snapshot. It's not longitudinal. I always pronounce that one all
Yes.
messed up. Longitudinal. Nobody has the foresight to think into the future. They're just thinking about signaling now to get what you want right now. It's a very short-term thinking. It's the way of fucking up the marshmallow experiment, essentially. I'm going to eat this marshmallow now, and in 15 minutes, I could have had two. And no offense. I know there's like, I can see Andrea and one or two girls here in the chat. You guys are the exception. Like, you're here because you're smart enough to understand that. And I'm hoping you guys picture that here. Am I signaling or am I right? Probably yes on both.
But the funniest thing though is like you can see the social signaling so well in the manosphere though.
Yeah. It's because it's so ham-fisted and awkward, because you got people who aren't socially calibrated trying to do it.
But it's kind of why I think it would actually be useful to get more autists into the manosphere.
I think so.
Just on the baseline that if they need like training wheels to learn how not to be awkward socially, there are dudes here who are way more socially awkward than most autists are.
Yeah. Well, that's how the best stuff in the sphere came about, is some autist literally had to A/B test being social. And that's how you can have a list of her leaning in, flipping her hair, touching her lips, stuff like that is good body language. By the way, thank you, John Doe, for the €2 super chat. Being the king of the red pill is like winning the Paralympics. Yes, king retard. I love it.
It's like being the coolest guy on the short bus.
Yeah, but I mean, it's great. It's training wheels that way. If you want to see ham-fisted, because in real life, social signals tend to be very subtle. But you're right. Here, everybody's autistic, so they have to, and not just autistic, but competitive. Hey, I read a book on this. Oh, I wrote a book on this. Well, I am this. Everything escalates so much. It's just the perfect example. Like,
Oh, holy shit, man! I
who's
just got this
the most
image.
bravado right now as far as social signaling goes?
I don't know. I don't pay attention to the manosphere. I just got this image in my head of someone acting the way they do on Twitter out in the real world.
Oh, dude, cockeyed stares. What the hell is with this guy?
Like, can you imagine some dude being in the club like, yeah, I only fuck nines and tens. Here's my phone. You can see here's my Lambo on my phone.
My brother used to do that as a joke, by the way. He would take his keys I can't remember what he was driving at the time. I think he had his Honda Prelude. He'd take the keys and he'd stand next to like a Lamborghini in Vegas or a Ferrari, like putting his key into the thing there and get a picture like that. And he'd always make that like his cell phone cover.
And I
It always
just
made me
thought
laugh.
it was kind of brilliant. And I kind of saw that on Tinder too when I was on there for a while, how much
Oh.
social signaling goes into people's profile photos on dating apps.
Ooh, I'd love some examples.
Well, you have back when I was doing it, there was a lot of people, they would have like one out of like three pictures. They'd have the up close face shot, they'd have the kind of full body shot pose picture, and then they have like one picture that signaled something about them. It's either a picture of them out with the girls, or them doing something sporty, or them traveling, kind of to signal that this is who I am socially.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the travel one. This says I'm easy if you can isolate me. It's all availability signaling. Let's take a quick pause here because Irish Alpha 82 with a €10 super chat. What is the non-woke Canadian take on Meghan Markle and her pet prince this week? Is it all virtual and social signaling, the difference between philanthropy and genuine charity? To be fair, the monarchy, we don't get like a UK version of this stuff. Like everybody kind of looks at it the same way you guys would look at what Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie are doing this week. Nobody's too invested. And then everybody in Alberta just uses it as an excuse to rant about how we need to get rid of the monarchy because we're just wasting money on it. And then a bunch of the Quebecers rant because it's just some Anglo bullshit. And then a bunch of Toronto people talk about the history of it. Nobody really cares. I don't think that's any different anywhere. Sorry, what were you saying, Carl?
I've been seeing more and more guys with mustaches and mullets. Are they making a comeback? I hope not.
I think Brian's been after his like wrestling career has been taken off there. Everybody else is trying to grow him again. I really do.
Holy shit, man.
Well, because think about it. The mullets were big in the 80s. And then 90s kids grew up and they're like, screw these 80s kids. And they don't want to do anything but grow a mullet. And then the 2000s and then the 2010s. And now it's like the kids of Gen X who grew the mullets think it's cool again when they saw some old pictures of dad. So they're trying it out because they don't want to look like the grunge guys from the 90s or the frosted tip guys of the 2000s. I think it's just a cycle. In fact, at that rate, that means flannel shirts and baggy bell bottoms or bootcut jeans will be back next year.
Yeah, I just hope we don't get a return to those horrible pastel colors. I can't pull them off.
Oh, it's because you're too pale. Just get a tan. Pastel works great when you're tanned up.
Yeah, I don't like the sun, man.
I don't mind the sun. The sun loves me too much, though. Like, I'm pretty pale right now. 20 minutes when the spring hits, I'll take a walk out in the sun. I'll come back 3 shades darker. So it's kind of neat.
And I can't really tan anymore without thinking about tanning, the whole tan your asshole shit. And then I start laughing. And then everyone starts wondering why is he laying on a beach towel laughing his balls off? Is he psychotic?
Speaking of social signaling, that one took the cake. That just perfect example of how ridiculous this escalation of social signaling goes. Because what was AJ Cortez did that one, and it started with, that stupid peyote and spiritual shamanistic stuff, and then it kind of kept escalating to the point where somebody's now making a serious argument that's vitamin D on your asshole is a good idea. Oh, it sounds pretty healthy. It's like, come on, dude. Nobody ever does these things either. It's all lazy signal.
It's the same thing. Like, how many people in the sphere said they took DMT, and how many actually took DMT?
Dude, I'd be kind of curious. Heck, I'd be curious how many nofap guys are actually just furiously jerking off but pretending they don't. I mean, I don't want to know for sure, but I'd be curious what kind of
That would
studies
be
would
like
show.
that would be like the most awkward study ever.
I know. Some kind of like a dick ring that can detect movement, like very sensitive GPS coordinations. Like,
Yeah,
you
it's
know,
like
or no, like a pedometer, like a step counter. Wait a minute. This wristband is registering a bad image. This
well,
registering
even
here
that is
5,000 steps.
even that is just like Rick said a while back. Like, I've never seen a thin person with a Fitbit. Now, I kind of disagree with him because I own Fitbits, but the whole idea behind a Fitbit on a fat person is to signal I'm working on it, even if they're not working on it.
Mm-hmm. Which makes sense because nothing bothers fat people more than being fat shamed. So it's kind of like their way of a shield, I guess, preventing people from making fun of them. Or like a guy who's completely out of shape wearing a tap out shirt, he's trying to say, I kind of watch UFC, so it's almost like I'm at the gym. Like, dude.
It's like all the back when you had like was it Chuck Liddell and everyone was wearing fucking affliction shirts.
Oh wow. I forgot all about those. Wasn't Rolo wearing those for like our first year of Rule Zeros? One sec here. Somebody was saying Sterling Cooper did a video mentioning the benefits of tanning your balls for what it's worth. Were the benefits that it looks better on camera? Because like I can go with that.
Yeah, same. Would look kind of weird if you're really fucking tanned up and then your nutsack is just white.
I don't know. Like I said, I don't know how. You know what? Never mind. I was gonna bring up like the difference in skin color. Like the dog walker, the one I talk about in my story. After the first time we slept together, she would just sit there like examining my junk as if it was like a science experiment. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? And she had never been with a colored guy before. And she goes, it's weird. These are supposed to be pink. Why is this one dark brown? And I'm like, really? It's just something I didn't really notice before then. But yeah, it was just one of those things. And she was generally like curious. And I don't know how I feel about that. And I'm pretty sure white guy balls are different too.
Well, Ryan can only drop N-bombs after he's gone for that walk in the spring.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm unfortunately I don't have hard R authority. I've kind of been given soft R authority, but now that I'm doing the branding thing, they've revoked that until Ed Lattimore will give me my card back, and he says he won't do that until I drink 100 cups of coffee, and I'm not about to, not without some kind of sweetener in it. So that's where we're standing right now. No N bombs.
That's actually a funny you mentioned Ed because his N-bomb use was a social signal back before he hit 40K followers.
Mm-hmm.
And then it became a negative social signal.
Ooh.
So he stopped using it.
I'm curious. Go into detail on this one. I want to hear your thought process.
Well, my thinking is just that if you're doing physics as a black dude, and Ed is kind of a Mr. Rogers-y type.
Yeah.
So using it was kind of his way of signaling, I'm real even though I'm doing this. But then once he hit 40K, then it became negative because then it kind of deflates his status as, not the typical.
Gotcha. He's so well spoken.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that's the euphemism they use. That's how white guys use hard R's, by the way. Oh, he's well spoken.
You're not like the others.
Yeah, you're not like I can't be too hard on it. That was my niche. The girls who liked dark guys to piss off dad, but not so dark as to like freak him out. So make it work for you. But no, I get that. It makes sense. I wonder what the demarcation line is though, because I know there's a point. Reddit actually had that too for and I don't know how applicable this is to social signaling, but they found there was like you get early adopters to a subreddit, any topic. We'll use the red pill for a good example, up to about 50,000 subscribers. And that's where people that were highly motivated, they were focused on the goal. And it wasn't a big enough a community that there was people jockeying for a position within it. Everybody was just aligned towards that goal. And then we found it was about 50,000 people that the combination of status signaling and regression to the mean causes this turning point where all of a sudden the place turns to absolute shit. And the only way to get away from that is either heavy-handed moderation or enough flavor posters, like, brands, personalities, whatever, that are willing to enforce social rules that have a user base that grows slower than their ability to assimilate the new group. But that's the problem, is that once things grow fast, it's impossible. It's that eternal September thing. And I think a lot of that is because of social signaling. Then guys start thinking, I don't want to join the red pilled subreddit because I want to learn better game and to get a better life and stop having covert contracts. They start doing it because they want flair. They want to be the coolest guy on the subreddit. Case in point, that Gay Lou Boyle guy, where like his genuine flexes are, hey, I write the most popular Reddit posts once a month. And then he like had that with a straight face, thinking that got him some kind of status,
Yeah, that was kind of funny, though. That reminds me that, what if I still have all those glow memes I made back in the day?
Oh, I hope so. The jazz hand ones made me laugh. Not that, but that's the problem now. We can't use those anymore. It's like they're like our version of Ed Lattimore N-bombs. Now, if I make a joke about Pat Stedman, people go, who? If I make a joke about Gay Lou Boyle, people are like, who the hell is this guy? People don't even know who Anthony Johnson is now. It's like all these people have been left behind because all we had to do was put in a decent amount of work, and now it's like a negative signal because people are like, you used to work with that guy? Ew.
Well, yeah, it's kind of similar to where was I going with this? Oh yeah, I was going to go with the business angle on it, because if you have a startup, the people working that startup, you have very low social loafing because everyone's motivated, everyone's into it, everyone wants this to be successful, etc.
Right.
But as a company grows, you get more and more social loafing, and the founders may still work as hard as they always did, but you're going to have a regression to the mean in terms of work ethic, in terms of IQ, in terms of everything else. And then you also have that aspect that most startups fail. Okay. So the startups you hear about will be the ones that had that specific group of founders who complemented each other and kind of pushed it forward. Like the people you hear about in the sphere, or the people who are influential, to use that term, are the people who have been producing content, not the people who have been producing drama.
I agree. Drama will spike, and I've actually done experiments to see this. Like I remember we were talking years ago, back when I was like, all right, what do I do? And your plan was what Cernovich told you: just drown people out with content, make shit, make it not topical, make it evergreen. And I will say this. I don't know about the other guys' channels, but from what I'm seeing, all the drama channels, they'll spike. They'll spike and they'll fall off, and they have to constantly be providing some kind of drama to get more attention. And as soon as they stop, it's done. For me, it's very slow growing, but every subscriber I get. So let's say, for example, this episode gets 3,000 views. I'll go back to the very first episode we ever did, and then it'll have 3,000 views. If the first episode here is 6,000 views, I go back to the original one, is 6,000 views. So it's generally, as it grows, everything else grows up around it from that content. And I don't know if this point was very tangential to your point or actually on point, but because I kind of lost myself in the middle there.
Oh, sorry, I got kind of drawn into a legal debate.
Legal debate here in the chat?
No, some guy sent me a text message.
Oh, a text message? What the hell is that?
Well, it was actually
send it to me on WhatsApp.
Well, it's an old joke, because police officers can ask to have you submit to voluntarily being searched. But in this case, it was that the fact that you wouldn't agree to let us voluntarily search you is probable cause for us to search you.
Oh, yeah, which is not, if I'm not mistaken, it's not legal, and they can't use that against you, but it is very intimidating.
I just love the logic.
Yeah. Oh, that's like their serious logic. But everybody keeps, and I've seen so many things, guys fighting with cops over this one. It's like, look, if they illegally search you, that's fine. If you can't stop them, just don't agree to it. And then when it goes to court, that shit gets thrown out. You have to have a long-term thinking on that one, as opposed to the social signaling. Like Americans have this big one now where I'm filming. It's supposed to be like a magic social signal to let people know you can't be fucked with. And I'll never understand that, because they think just recording somebody beating your ass is going to stop them from beating your ass. It's like, no, That's just so after they beat your ass, you can sue them for whatever they're worth. Which for a lot of guys, if you're fighting on camera, probably not a lot. Camera doesn't really help you. Diversity is our strength. That other one too, same thing.
Well, I do think that the filming does have an effect, because you wouldn't have had all the protests that set America on fire last year if it wasn't for the fact that suddenly all these incidents of police brutality were actually being filmed.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I see what you're saying. But that's the point, though. Didn't they find, with all the body camera stuff, it wasn't that more things were being recorded. It's that the accusations of police brutality went down. Because now that there was evidence, none of these cases were able to hold any water. So it signaled both things if you wanted to look for it. If you look for police brutality, you're always going to find one. And you parade that one out. But in reality, it was actually signaling the opposite. It's that people stopped accusing cops of brutality once they realized the whole thing was being filmed. That's another problem with social signals, is that they don't even mean what they actually mean. They mean what you want them to mean. If that's a good way of putting it.
Oh yeah, it was kind of like I remember I had the argument back in the day that if you're really paranoid about fake rape accusations,
mm-hmm.
film yourself having sex with the girl, without her knowing.
Right.
Because the logic is, yeah, rape charges suck, but the penalties if you get convicted for rape are much worse than to the fine you get for illegally filming someone.
Yeah. Well, that's like you're doing a risk analysis there. People who do signaling don't think that far ahead. They're just worried about, they accuse me of being a bad guy, so I need to appease the crowd, so they stop doing that. That's why that supplicative social signal of, I'm sorry, the women are great, and I'm a good feminist. This is always the go-to for these guys, because they aren't thinking past the social signal. Like you said with empiricism, the reason you don't get along well with people is because most people aren't empirical with the way they think.
And that was something that changed with me after I read Kahneman about thinking fast and slow.
Mm-hmm.
Because that made me kind of aware how many things that I believed that I couldn't justify based on the available evidence. And you're always going to have some aspect of things that you can't prove with evidence,
mm-hmm.
that you're just going to have to do based on pure logic. But for things that can be determined with evidence, you should probably go with what the evidence says.
Yeah. The only argument I would make against that is sometimes just experience, right? If you experience this doesn't make any sense. I can't explain it, but every time I do it, it works. But I mean, I guess evidence, the outcome would be evidence in that case. So maybe I'm not really arguing with you at all. We're just walking in circles.
Yeah, that would be kind of grounded theory, where you just try stuff out until it fits, and then you just see if you can replicate it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not evidence, and it's not going to be applicable to a general situation. I think we've had this debate before. Because like the Canadian census says the average guy is 5'10".
Right.
That doesn't mean that every guy in the country is 5'10". That just means that if you take all the heights, add them up, and divide that out by the number of people, it comes out to this. The fact that your buddy Bob is 6'8" doesn't contradict that statement.
Oh, now we're getting to like the not all women are like that type thing. That's the other signal. Perfect example, actually. Every time you mention, on average, you're going to get girls will flake. Girls are fickle. Girls are solipsistic and very insecure, and they'll treat men like crap because they have so much abundance. They don't really care if they walk over it. And then the first thing you get is a girl socially signaling, well, I'm not like the other girls, and not all women are like that. Her way of saying, I'm not bad like all these other things, even though she most likely is. She just wasn't aware of it at the time. That's another example. And then guys will start arguing with them, having these great arguments with feminists. Oh, well, all women are like that is technically a heuristic. And you're just like, dude, she's just trying to signal she's a good person. Tell her she's nice, pat her on the forehead, put your finger painting on the fridge, and call it a day. She doesn't really care if all women are like that. She just doesn't want you calling her bad.
Plus, if you hang out with her for a while, you're going to hear her go, all these fucking bitches, a few times.
That's my go-to, actually. My girl says that. She's like, hey, you should stop being so misogynistic and saying such mean things about women. I'm like, all women? What about that chick of yours in high school that stole your boyfriend and got pregnant by him? Oh, she's like, yeah, fuck that bitch. Like, all right.
But that's essentially when women talk about other women or all other women, they mean all girls except me. I'm
Yeah.
different. And you just have to kind of accept that.
And I think that's great. That lets you know, like, all this worried about bad women language and not being a good feminist. All you got to do is not be autistic about it and realize your audience. It's like, as long as you're not bad mouthing the girls that you're talking to, they'll generally agree with a lot of this stuff if you even care if they do.
And that's why it kind of bothered me that, I'm red pilled became a social signal for I know the empirical truth of how the world operates.
Oh, yeah, that didn't backfire at all for anybody, did it? And then it switched over to red pill aware. Remember that? Because then red pill was like, I know the truth. And then a bunch of like flat earthers were onto like red pilling on the flat earth. So everybody's like, yeah, red pilling's not good. So they have to say they're red pill aware. Which is like literally, I know the Bible exists. That's like a Christian bragging about that. It's like, dude.
I know there was this man named Jesus. I know of him.
Oh yeah, I've heard of Jesus.
I'm Christianity aware.
Yeah, Christianity aware.
My aunt used to. I have a bunch of evangelical family members, and I have an aunt who's the worst of them. And whenever she would mention Jesus, I would say, "Oh, yeah, that's a dude I buy Coke from, and it's Jesus." She hated that joke.
Yeah, well, and that's the one thing about social signals I don't think a lot of people catch on, is that the reason they exist is because people are lazy. And I don't mean that like people are lazy as a pejorative, as in just do the work. I mean it in that from a survival instinct standpoint, we're cognitively lazy. The brain takes a bunch of energy to think about shit. The body takes a ton of energy to do shit. So if we can just say some magic words and people will believe us, so much easier. And so we kind of adopted this whole armor and like arms race where guys get better at lying through social signals, girls get better at detecting those lies, and then that's where they build their innate or their commitment skepticism bias. I love you doesn't mean shit, but if you buy her a diamond ring, she'll believe you then because that costs 3 months salary. Or in a girl's case, the girl saying she's not like the other girls doesn't mean shit, but if she actually blows you on the first date, then that means a lot.
I know, it's kind of like the argument that if you're going to get a girl something that shows that you're committed to her, get her a tit job.
I like that. Bless them scientists that make the perfect women.
But it kind of goes into why certain things are hard to change in terms of policy and things. Mm-hmm. Let's say the gay marriage thing.
Right.
Or I think being gay was even illegal at one point.
Yeah, I think in the 60s or 50s, maybe even the 70s, depending.
And then when you argue that, maybe we should stop prosecuting men for fucking other men or girls for fucking other girls. Once you try to change that, then the social signaling kicks into overdrive, because then the people who want to show, we are the good people. We think about families. Like, we can't have gay people around kids. Are you crazy? They will spread the gay virus in the school classes if you let them be in school. Then you get those people, and they're signaling we're good, moral, upstanding, family value citizens. Mm-hmm. And you have the other side signaling, you shouldn't punish someone just because they love differently, whatever. On the other side, signaling to their group that we're the real good people because we're defending the people who are currently being punished by this unjust law. And it's just social signaling overdrive.
And the worst part about that is the only people who are invited to this whole battle were the actual gay people in the middle. They're just the football. They're the football in the Patriots versus the Green Bay Packers fighting at the 1 yard line. And I don't get it though, because you get a lot of that community, and then they start signaling to go for one group or the other. You got your Milo Yiannopoulos who signals, I'm not like the other gays. I'm the cool one who loves conservative values. We should stay in the closet. Or you get the super alphabet mafia types who will just go hog on that one. And that's how you spiral out of control. And that's how you get idiots thinking that it's a good idea to have a drag queen reading about queer theory to elementary school kids in a library, which they've been trotting that same photo around the one time it happened for like 10 years now.
Yeah, that kind of comes the same way with guns in America because it's not really about the guns anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Because one
But
side is signaling, we're pro-gun, we have all the guns, and the other side is signaling that we're the good people who think you shouldn't need to have military-grade firearms.
mm-hmm.
And it's just a social signal to your own in-group.
And nothing ever changes. That's the beauty of it. Everybody will point to their little Pyrrhic victories, but nothing essentially has changed. It's not like Americans aren't armed to the teeth. And it's not like, I guarantee you there's a ton of like illegal, depending on how you look at it, illegal weapons in among like good weapon owners, because they just think you're not allowed to register. Like what's the argument? What part of shall not be infringed do you not understand? You know what I mean?
Yeah. But it kind of reminded me of this. There was a book called And the Band Played On about the AIDS outbreak in San Francisco in like the early 80s, I think it was, during Reagan.
Oh, yeah.
And once they found out that it was sexually transmitted, they wanted to close down the bathhouses that they'd open up all over San Francisco, which were essentially places where dudes went to have unprotected sex with each other quite frequently and in high volume. But the reasoning behind closing it was that, okay, if we close this, then you make it easier to you take the number of contacts down a bit, and you get more oversight into who has slept with a person who has the virus, so we can trace it easier.
Mm-hmm.
But the argument against was that for keeping them open was that closing them would send a signal that you were putting the gays back into the closet. And the cost of that social signal was viewed as higher than the cost of lives from potentially more infections.
Man, I wonder if there's a current parallel to that whole thing to something currently happening. If only, right? If only.
Yeah, if only.
Damn it, Dougie. Dude, I can't. The girl and I have talked about this. I don't care if this virus kills us. We're going to stay alive long enough to signal to vote out Dougie and Justin. I don't care who we put in. I will put in the most progressive, ridiculous, I'd rather have a crackhead in there just to signal, fuck around and find out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, what did they do anyway? Was it the enriching their closest family members or something?
Where to even start? First off, Dougie is so afraid to take a stand on something that he's just essentially deferred governance to medical experts who are and the ones he picked are the most risk-averse people I've ever seen. From making a policy to have sex off in glory holes, which is kind of demeaning to begin with. Like, it's not your place to tell me how I need to have sex, all the way up to like, you need to wear 3 masks. You could still, and just to be safe, because if we lose one life, that's too many. After the vaccine, you still have to be quarantined. Trudeau enriching his buddies, going off to Epstein Island on a paid vacation while he was the PM. He's had like 3 ethics board convictions, basically saying he's acting corrupt as fuck.
I actually do think that's an interesting take, though, with the medical experts versus the government, because you have to kind of look into like what kind of people are you putting into governance.
Mm-hmm.
It's sort of like I've been a fan of don't let lawyers write laws.
Okay.
Because they're going to write them in a language that makes sure you still need lawyers. That's why you have, like, instead of saying, like, the Bible says, thou shalt not steal. In the law, you have, like, 23 different versions of stealing.
Larceny, as if that's even a real word.
Well, it's kind of like, just say, like, okay, embezzlement, that's stealing. Fraud, that's stealing.
Yep.
It's just, why can't you just say, if you take someone else's shit, you get punished. If you take a lot of the person's shit, you get punished harder.
Makes perfect sense.
It's kind of like if you put the wrong people, like if you leave finance, for instance, up to like the most conservative bookkeepers, that's going to have an issue because bookkeepers are generally conservative by nature. Same thing with medical experts. They're generally acting on first do no harm.
Right. To a fault, I would argue. But I think that's the point you're making too.
Yeah, it's kind of like the same thing. If you put the police in charge of shit, don't be surprised if the police get bigger budget and more mandates.
Yeah, and never do any wrong. But I agree, that's the whole thing there. Everybody likes the idea of deferring to authority. Well, enough people do anyway. But that's the problem. From a medical guy, his only concern is how many people are dying. Let's make that number less. Do you think a doctor has any indication of like economic consequences of quarantine? Probably not. And so when you get people who's are supposed to have a holistic situational awareness, what's going on, and they keep deferring to these single one-dimensional arguments from authority, then yeah, you get a whole bunch of unintended consequences. And that, like you said, the signal takes over. And in this case, signaling is more important. And how are we seeing the signaling now with just COVID? Designer like Louis Vuitton masks. Like, dude, remember when the argument was about N95 masks being effective and all the other masks were BS? And they didn't help?
Yeah.
Yeah, and that disappeared because we found out there was money to be made by selling designer masks, or people found out they really didn't care. It's not like lung cancer in the 70s where everybody had a family member who died of it. Now it's like you're very hard pressed to find somebody who's had any serious ramifications. Now, I'm not saying it's not dangerous. I'm just saying the reason it's completely gone out of control is because of social signaling.
Yeah, and even in the US, you got that whole thing that not wearing a mask is now a social signal rather than a choice based in, harm reduction. Let's use that term.
Yeah. And that's how you get that stupid argument now about nuance. Everybody says nuance or hear both sides, thinking, which isn't a really good argument either. That's just saying, take these crazy idiots on this side, take the crazy idiots on this side, divide all their stupid ideas by half, and now you have this hodgepodge of stupid ideas that appeal to everybody and nobody likes you.
Well, it kind of reminds me of this. It kind of reminds me of this great documentary I watched earlier this week from Canada, of all things. Yeah, it's called The Flood. It's about like the opioid epidemic up there.
Oh yeah, got YouTube ads for that coming out too.
And one of the interesting things there was that when they started to do things like needle exchange programs, consumption rooms, and those kind of things that you do just to get the harm down, the argument against was, is this society condoning and contributing to drug use? Which is kind of a stupid argument, because you're arguing that, okay, it's okay that these people die because we send the right social signal.
Right. Which is a weird way to, and that's the problem I have with it. Isn't like, if you want to do that, fine. If you're willing to sacrifice X amount of lives to tell everybody the signal that we as a society think it's okay, but then that's the problem, is that people don't own that. They have to build this convoluted signal that gives them emotional distance from it. Like, I figured Second Amendment, perfect example of that too. I am surprised that the conservative argument for the Second Amendment is, look, we get it. Just because there's this many guns in the States, that means we're going to have more deaths by guns than we would have had with no guns. And that's just the cost of doing business. But that's the problem. That's like an ownership of something, and people don't want to own it. That's why they're saying stupid things like, well, I need to hunt. It's like the AR-15 is the most popular hunting rifle, or, all those stupid arguments you get because everybody has to have an emotional distance from these things. And then they social signal with it. But it's never actually about what it's about. Drug One, perfect example too, because they actually did that in my Victoria, BC, where we were working in the military. They started to make needle clinics because they're like, these people are going to do heroin regardless. At least this way, they have a safe spot to do it. They're not spreading AIDS by needles. We're not putting crack needles on the ground by high schools, and we can track it better. And everybody complained about it. But then once it went through, things went well. Then they defunded it, and all of a sudden, I can't remember the street, but one of the streets basically turned into like tent city. And it was just people dying, and they're from fentanyl overdoses.
But I mean, that's why I think owning it is kind of like the key here, though, is that signaling is well and good, but you kind of have to own not just the signal, but the signal itself doesn't do anything.
Yeah.
And I think that was the biggest problem we got into here, was at that point, it happened after that whole personal brand thing got big, when everyone had to be a brand. Then everyone started signaling like crazy, and they kind of lost focus of, well, you actually have to do shit too.
Yeah,
you can't just sit in your basement signaling all day.
Does this get you laid? Don't care got laid became my mantra. Does this work at all? Or are you just trying to tell me to buy your shit?
But I think, and just like the ownership of signals is just, it's an emotional issue in a lot of cases, especially like in the one you referenced there with like the needle program,
Yeah.
because it is a very, you have a fairly decent correlation between the harm drugs do and the strictness of an enforcement policy.
Mm-hmm.
In essence, the stricter your laws, the more people are going to die.
Yeah. And there's a butter zone. It's like Laffer curve applied to everything.
Well, that's a good. I'm glad you're finally admitting that Jesus is a drug. Maybe we should put that in the UN.
Wait, who's saying this right now? Who's talking
Tommy.
about Jesus on this podcast? God damn it.
Yeah, I always.
Oh, Tommy.
I would often use that as like a facetious argument that if you're high on Jesus, should we ban Jesus?
This is actually a great example. Like the original virtue signal was church. Like if there's a reason that remember Sunday bests? Everybody was talking about wearing their Sunday bests.
Yeah.
Yeah, my grandparents were like that for 50 years. They had one set of super nice clothes, like a perfect gown, a great suit, and they wore it when they went to church. And it started off as being like showing reverence for church, which was weird since Martin Luther had basically said, you don't need all the bells and whistles to worship Jesus, just do it in your own way. And then people turned that in a way of flexing on their neighbor. Oh, look at her dress. Oh, wow, she's dressed the nicest. Well, she's the most godly. Well, and now it's at the point where, what's the most absurd one? Girls with like 4 kids by 4 baby daddies, but she's the most like she's the one most in need of forgiveness. So we need to help her out. People are just ridiculous.
Yeah, like I've been joking back and forth that the church hates sinners, but they love recovered sinners.
Mm-hmm. And the more often you recover your sin, the more tithing you get. It's a perfect cycle.
Yeah, it's like the biggest recruitment areas for the church is prison and whorehouses.
Pretty much. No atheists in foxholes, right?
Well, if you start to look at like which girls are actually going to the church, it's never the girls that are, sort of normal. It's always like the 4 kids by 8 different baby daddies, past of hoeing it up real hard.
Mm-hmm. And we're not speculating, guys. This isn't opinion. Ian Ironwood noticed this as far back as the 2000s. He actually wrote about it in his book, The Manosphere, which is a funny title. But yeah, he talked about how churches all across America, which is arguably the biggest Bible country in the world, were, as Rollo puts it, falling for the feminine imperative. And I'd argue it's just those were the most low-hanging fruit for the church that was getting waning numbers of a culture that's becoming increasingly secular. People who need forgiveness is the new booming market, in the same way that like the Philippines is the new market for Philip Morris. Turns out third world countries are full of smokers. Who'd have thunk?
Oh, that was a good one by Chester there. Is it Jesus in fault for the accident when I say Jesus take the wheel?
Jesus provides good steering for those who steer themselves.
That's kind of an interesting thing, though, because if you think about it legally speaking,
mm-hmm.
if you're making a policy argument and you say, well, my faith and belief in Jesus tells me this is right, and Jesus told me it was right, then that's supposedly a good thing. But if, let's say, you murder 8 chicks to prevent the apocalypse because Jesus told you needed human sacrifice, then you're insane.
We still have that now, though. Now it's like that woke church. But again, it's all about the signaling. If people are super godly people, or at least want to signal that they are, these kind of arguments carry more weight. Saying Jesus is my co-pilot and Jesus forgave me. That's why every evangelical preacher, after he gets blown by some 16-year-old boy in a bathroom at the airport, comes out. They start throwing out the godliest stuff you've ever heard in your life, because they're like, they just know forgiveness is like a super judgy or super Jesus trait. I better start praying my ass off. No different than some guy with the Me Too accusation. Now all of a sudden he's like, hey, I just donated a bunch of money to Black Lives Matter and I'm wearing my feminist t-shirt, guys. Lay off.
Okay, I just donated to Black Lives Matter. Can I beat up another black dude now?
Yeah. And I've seen this, even in the military, I saw this. Matt, the Matt that I talk about in my book, the one whose fiance tried to bang me during her husband's stag, he used to do this thing where he was, what's the word? Grossly incompetent. Grossly incompetent. And I could always tell when he had fucked up big time because he started ironing his jacket, like creases in his jacket sleeves, which is not regulation. The stuff's made of Nomex. The last thing you want to do is reduce the fire retardation of it by being, retarded. But he would always signal that his uniform is crisp and clean to a fault. And every time he fucked up, he would hoping it would buy him some favor. Never did work out for him. And it's no different. It's the same human, like no matter what sphere of influence you're in, there's always that one guy who needs to signal that he's not a fuck up. Same as the single mom who found Jesus, right?
Well, it's the same thing with computer programmers. If they're well dressed and well groomed, they're obviously not working. I'm not kidding. It's actually known within the industry that the better dressed the programmer is, the less he's working. Because when they're working hard, it's t-shirts and they haven't showered in like 8 weeks.
So here's my question. Are there guys who actively work on bad hygiene just to signal as they're a good programmer? Or is it autistic enough of a space that people don't have that kind of second order thinking?
It's mostly an autistic enough space that you kind of don't notice it.
But that's kayfabe. We've talked about that before too. Signaling is kayfabe, where it's a theatrical production for the audience. And the part that I love about you, me, and a lot of the guys who know wrestling is they're probably the best contributors to the sphere because they know kayfabe better than anything because they were raised watching it, Yeah,
like I still remember when I realized that wrestling wasn't real.
See, I don't think I ever thought about it in that way, like was it real or not. I remember the argument, and I just watched it and was entertained by it. It's like watching a movie and thinking, is that real? It just never came up for me.
Yeah, but remember like back when the Sheik and Duggan got caught in the car with the weed and they were supposed to be fighting each other and you had that whole kayfabe scandal?
Okay, that I remember.
That was kind of like a wake-up moment, and after that I kind of got addicted to all the dirt sheets. Like the things that, and I love listening to them talk about what's actually going on backstage, like when Harley Race pulled a gun on Hulk Hogan and shit.
Actually, the one that always got me was the one they had in the Sky Dome. I can't remember which WrestleMania it is. I want to say 4 or 5 maybe, but Hacksaw Jim Duggan, everybody in Canada loved him. I remember he'd always do his USA chant when he was getting his like second wind, ready to beat the shit out of the guy, and everybody loved it and they always cheered it on. My family all liked it. And then the one time that he went in Toronto, he started chanting USA, USA, and the crowd kind of turned on him. And it's just funny how that same signal, if it's on TV, is cool. But as soon as he did it in Canada, had the complete opposite effect. I don't know why, but that one always made me laugh. What's that?
Because Bret was a heel in the US and he was a face in Canada.
Yeah. Same signals. Absolutely nothing different about it. And if Bret Hart wasn't from Calgary, he'd probably be like a great hero in the US too.
Yeah, probably.
But again, it's all these weird signals. But yeah, kayfabe. We all knew this though. Like like Carl said, there's some point in a wrestler fan's life where he realizes this isn't real. Probably the moment when you realize the Undertaker actually can get beat up and it was just an act. You don't have to dump his urn out to finally knock him out. There's that. I think that was like the first Undertaker WrestleMania, by the way. Or no, it wasn't WrestleMania because he lost to Hulk Hogan. I remember that because he dumped his urn and then he cracked him on the head with it. And he sees pain. But then you realize a lot of things they're just theatrics.
Yeah, I think there's this great episode with Daniel Bryan. I think it was on that Hot Wings show. Yeah, I'm not sure if you've seen it.
Oh, the one he did with Undertaker?
No, it's called Spicy Hot Wings or something. It's like an interview show where they
I've seen the really show. I was just wondering which episode you were talking about.
The one with Daniel Bryan. He's another wrestler. He's a fairly newer guy, but and he had this great one where I think it was either that or he did that super spicy chip challenge.
Mm-hmm.
And the host is sitting there like sweat dripping and obviously in pain, and he sits there like completely unaffected. And the host is like, "Is this not burning?" And he's like, "Yeah, it hurts like hell, but when you're a wrestler, sometimes you have to pretend it's not hurt. It doesn't hurt when it hurts."
That's awesome. Yeah, and you don't even have to go to wrestling too. That's where I see it in the subway. When I used to take the subway to work or le metro in Montreal, I'd see it all the time. Somebody would miss their train and they'd run up to the thing and the train wouldn't be there. And instead of just like, what do you think you would do if you went to go rush to catch a train, but you missed it? You just stop and wait for the next one. But they always had to like look at their watch, make some big theatrical production. And I used to call it like subway theater, where everybody had to know I'm not running over here because I'm an idiot. I'm doing it because I missed my subway. And I'm going, nobody's watching, nobody cares, but these guys still feel the need to offer a little bit of kayfabe so nobody thinks they're crazy. And I'm just like, it's got to be instinctive. There's no way somebody taught this guy to do that.
No, but I had the same thing with people who show up late to meetings.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you're showing, there are two signals you can do. You can look like you really stressed to get there, or you can walk in calmly with like a fresh coffee in your hand.
Oh, yeah.
And one signal is I'm important enough not to give a shit that I'm late. And the other one is I want you to think that I'm late, but that I made an effort to be here on time.
Yeah. Meanwhile, what's the best thing to do? Do it as quietly as possible so you don't disturb the meeting in progress. But nobody seems to do that.
No, so okay, the super chat. And, this is one of my pet causes, really. So,
Ooh.
But then again, just keep in mind, I'm actually for legalizing everything.
Yeah, I don't care enough to fight it. So I'm like, yeah, why not? It's not like people, and I kind of learned this when they legalized weed here. Like when I left the military, I'm like, I'm doing weed. I'm going to stop living by the man's rules. And it was fun. And we went to Amsterdam. We did a bunch of shit. And then they made it legal here. And then we bought a bunch. We're like, yeah, smoke. And then I was like, I don't want to anymore. You know what I mean? Now that it's not cool and they put them in like toothpaste tubes and soccer mom, like, fuck it.
I kind of see where you're coming from with that one, but this one with clean needles and say, I just think it's generally if people are going to do something regardless of what the hell we do.
Yep.
Like Duarte in the Philippines had the death penalty for drug users now, and people are still using drugs.
Yeah.
And I actually heard this said very well by a guy who was a former heroin user.
Mm-hmm.
Like every time you put that needle in your arm, there's a decent chance that you're either going to overdose, that you're going to have something that laced with some bad shit, but you still do it. Threatening people who risk their lives 4 times a day injecting with
it's not going to be
sanctions, it's not going to work. So you just have to focus on how can they do this thing that they're going to do anyway in the least harmful manner, both to themselves and to society. And I think having clean needles, safe space, I think safe supply is probably the next logical step.
Yeah. Well, my parents did the same thing. My mom used to boot for me when I was a kid because she's like, look, I get it. You're going to find alcohol. Every 16-year-old does. Every 15-year-old does. At least this way, I know how much you're drinking. I know what you're drinking. Give me a call if you need a ride home because I don't want you driving home drunk. It's that the good is the enemy of the good is the perfect. I can't remember. Yeah. Was that Voltaire?
That could be.
That's essentially what you're doing. You're saying, okay, these people, like you said, they're going to do drugs. They're probably going to overdose. They're probably going to kill themselves. That's fine. But you're containing it so that there's no needles in, grocery store parking lots. Yeah. Kids aren't going to get it. You're keeping the friendly fire down, or the, what's the word for collateral damage?
Yeah. So I think it's a good idea just from a pragmatic perspective.
Yeah. And then from a signaling perspective, though, that's you're signaling that drugs are okay. People don't like that, even though it's completely going to have a better effect on drugs in general, or that you're not the victims of drug overdoses. You don't care about them. You're letting them overdose inside that house. You're like, but that's the problem. Is that do you want your feelings and the attempt to look good socially or intervene over saving lives? And I think that's the hard argument where people have to realize our monkey brain is not out to help us. This shit only worked when we were 150 people to a tribe hunting elephants. Now in like a modern society, you kind of have to stop letting your limbic system control the narrative. And I don't think we're there yet. I really don't.
I think we're going to get there at some point, but it's going to be a while until we get to the point. Like there are a lot of things people do that harm themselves and or society.
Yeah.
Like cars are a good example, guns are a good example, and in all those cases, we kind of have the logic that okay, we're going to have strict laws governing it, we're going to have regulations for it, and then we're going to have some fairly staunch consequences if you drive drunk, for instance, if you drive without having a license, if you don't have insurance, etc. That's a way of saying, okay, cars are dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking like an object that weighs a ton or two that can move at like 80 miles an hour. That's a lot of forces at play.
Yeah.
But if we don't do it and we do the other way, then you're going to have, if you don't have any regulations for it, it's just going to be a case where car companies can do whatever they want. People can drive drunk. People can drive without a speed limit, etc. And then you can add the other aspect that I kind of learned from the, you know, why they started moonshining up in the Appalachian Mountains?
Prohibition? Or you mean
No,
specifically moonshine?
no, why they started doing it in the first place.
Oh, I don't know. Something about I'm assuming it has something to do with not letting the government tell you what to do, but I don't know specifically.
No, it was actually a very logical argument. They grew a lot of corn and they had a lot of excess corn that they sold, and then they bought other goods with that money.
Oh, okay.
But if they were going to take, they live far the fuck up in the mountains and they have to travel quite a distance to get to a marketplace. And it's a lot easier to turn the corn into liquor because you can transport it in a much larger, let's say you turn a ton of corn.
Yeah, it's a compression.
Like, yeah, 50, and you still get the same money for it, but you can transport it much easier.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of the same issue with prohibition is that when you're smuggling something, you want to, the big risk is when you're smuggling and moving it. And you want that to be as small as possible so it's hard to detect.
Right, small and light.
So if you're trying to smuggle, let's say, alcohol, and your choice is 4 cases of beer or 1 liter of pure alcohol, it's much easier to transport that same volume of alcohol in a much higher concentration.
Yeah, well, I think what's 150 proof versus 70 proof, literally twice as efficient.
And it's the same thing with drugs. It's like the reason why you get fentanyl is that it's like 100 times stronger than heroin.
Mm-hmm. So you don't need as much space to move it.
If you can smuggle a kilo of fentanyl, and that's the same as 100 kilos of heroin, that takes a lot less space. Same reason why weed got a lot stronger in the last 20, 30 years. Like I remember first time I smoked weed, I didn't get really high at all. And then I had like a huge period of time where I didn't smoke any at all.
Right.
And then I got like 3 hits off a joint at a party and I was stoned for like 4.5 hours.
I know that feeling.
And the whole reason was like back when I smoked a lot of weed, it was essentially like maybe like 6-7% THC.
Mm-hmm.
And now these fuckers are growing shit that have like 20 to 25% THC. So
and
that was
adding
essentially
vapes to that, it's even more.
And that was kind of my monkey brain there that was used to like, oh yeah, I'm good with drinking this, 4% alcohol beer, getting like a pint of Everclear.
You know that feel too. I actually did have a moonshiner in my little hometown, and he hooked us up once, and I was like, oh my God, what? I have made a terrible mistake.
And that's kind of why I see that you kind of just have to make the concessions as a society that are good enough that it does the least possible harm. And generally you don't, like, if you're going to have heroin users, it's better that they smoke it than inject it.
The reason why that's never going to happen, though, is democracy, essentially. What do I mean by that? Politicians need to pander. If you're not likable, like nobody votes based on policy. They vote based on what they like and what it socially signals. So they're in a constant state of image management. So all these, like, you just have to take a stand. That's great, but the politician can't take a risk that he won't get voted in next season, even though he just saved 500,000 lives or however many that die from heroin or whatever it is. At the same time, you get people in a large enough democratic like voting system that are so detached from the consequences of a heroin policy that they focus on the signal more than the effect. So like if you want a good drug policy like this one here, you want people who are vested in, people who live in the areas that have crack needles and heroin needles. You have people whose family have died from it, people who are in the city. You don't want some rural church community dealing with the urban crack problem, you know? But that's the problem. Everybody gets a single vote, and it's so dispersed among the population that the signal outweighs the noise. And until
it's
that's
like
changing, and I don't think you can change it until you change the way we govern.
I think you can, but I just think you need enough data, in a sense. And you need to actually, well, you need the data to convince the people who are actually making the decisions, and you need to give them the right sales pitch. And then you can kind of let them run with it.
Well, they need to have assurances that they aren't going to get booted out by people who want to signal how great they are by not going for the data.
Because, you know, it's kind of like my, one of my grandmas. She lived in the countryside her entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Never met an immigrant, hated immigrants. She was like the hard R type. What changed all that for her was when she was put in a nursing home and she was being treated by a bunch of immigrant nurses. That kind of changed her view on it, because then she actually knew what she was talking about. And I think that's one of those things that a lot of... Yeah, Tom, we can see your chat.
Yeah, it's skin in the game. That's essentially it. If it doesn't affect you, then the signal takes over. As soon as there has some effect on your life, then the noise takes over, or the substantive argument takes over. But you can't do that with something like heroin. If everybody just did one needle of heroin, they'd be so much more knowledgeable about the heroin epidemic. But you're never going to get that to happen. But then that's what you're supposed to do is, okay, so we'll put people who are experts in the field on it. I'd like to say that works, but we're seeing the examples now in COVID. No, it just makes them make really twisted decisions based on that singular thing there. They'll probably make some decision that ruins something very valuable in order to save more heroin lives and completely miss the holistic picture. I think it's a problem that's not going to have a solution. And I think we're going to continue to monkey brain our way through it. I'm not as hopeful as you.
I don't know. I think it will change over time, but it's kind of like, think about other things that we've changed policy on that are similar. Like I like to use the parallel with when being gay was criminalized, just for the reason that if you ask someone who's born after like 1990, they're most likely like, yeah, why was this ever illegal? If you ask people who were born before 1960, they probably have a slightly different view.
Slightly.
And the whole reason behind it is it's just what we kind of see everywhere kind of shapes us when we grow up. That's why I say conservatism is a cuck ideology. Well, it's
progressivism with a speed brake or with a handbrake, isn't it?
The whole reason behind it is you're not going to be able to stop changes from happening. So, okay, you're trying to speed brake it. But that also means that you're just, you've already lost the war, but you're still hiding out in your little island there, LARPing that the war is still going on.
Oh, you're talking about that Japanese guy who was out in the Philippines for like 40 years in the jungle?
Yeah, exactly. So at that point, you can just come up with your own conservative, or come up with policy solutions based on your set of values and ideology, instead of insisting we have to keep things the way they are.
That would be nice. I think that's the big problem with conservatism in general. There's no direction.
I think it's a problem with politicians in general. It's that they stay in office for too long. And when I'm a bit bigoted when it comes to age.
Mm-hmm.
But the reasoning behind that is, when you have less time left to live than you've already lived, then you don't have to kind of deal with the consequences of things you're doing now to the same extent as someone has to live with it for 60 years.
We all know boomers. I get you. I can't disagree with it. But then again, I know if you have people are kicked out too quickly, then it just shifts where the power is from people that are like military. Perfect example. Every 2 to 3 years, you're posted out of your unit into something else. It's without fail. And it turns out the military ends up not being the more important cog in the wheel. It ends up being that contractor who's worked in the same office for 10 years because he has the institutional memory. I think there's a balancing act in there. And I don't know where the magic line is between temporary and permanence. I wish I did. That would be nice. I don't even think we've ever even studied the idea of how long is too long and how short is too short.
And it's like when I've seen that a lot in a lot of the companies I've worked for, is that they end up becoming dependent on outside contractors. Because the contractors, as long as you pay well, they'll stay. But the employees, as long as they get a better offer from someone else, they're going to bolt.
Right.
There's a lot of money in filling that role as institutional memory for an organization. It doesn't
my
take a lot
buddy's
of
career
time.
is based on that.
No,
Yeah, he used to be in the
what is he-
military and he quit because he didn't like it. And then he joined as a contractor to the military. He's been paid better and he's got more institutional memory than guys he used to sail with that were his supervisors. It's absolutely hilarious. There. Oh, I cut you off, though. Please finish.
Yeah, no, but I'm just reading Andrea in chat because he's right. Conservatives are generally lower in openness to new experience on the personality scale. Yeah. I would also argue that they're probably less creative, just on the basis that if you look at who is producing all the art, it's generally people who are on the left. Mm-hmm. Of course, then we can all agree on that certain parts of the now excessively progressive left have gone a bit too far to one end. And I think the biggest issue here is that the extremists are kind of the loudest voices in the debate on both sides.
So on one everybody wants to signal their in-group, and the loud voice on the in-group is the easiest way to signal it, and people are lazy, so that's what they're going to do. That's like I said, I don't see this as a problem we can solve. I think it's hardwired into the way we're designed as people, and I don't think that's going to change. Yeah, unless there's like a genetic change.
But the biggest problem now is that it's so amplified.
Mm-hmm. But that's a byproduct of tech. As tech increases, communication gets better, and that amplification is inevitable.
So you have to kind of figure out a way to deal with the amplification of the social signaling to prevent that the social signaling kind of destroys our society. And part of that means establishing, in my opinion, trusted sources of information. It sounds very Ministry of Truthy, and it sort of is. But I think we've seen, especially in the US with the current demarcation lines there, is that when you're not even watching the same news channels anymore.
Right.
And you kind of see, I saw this, there's a documentary on Netflix about social media. I can't remember the name of it. But when everyone is getting their tailored feeds, and the goal of the company is to keep you there as long as possible, at that point, you get an unfortunate set of incentives. So people end up developing these far from each other worldviews. And that was one of the things that was most jarring when I've had my breaks from the manosphere.
Mm-hmm.
Because if I went by what the manosphere was doing back in 2018, 19, I had that break.
Right.
And then I just need to collect my thoughts here for a second. Back when I did like the 51st dates thing.
Right.
Everyone in this space was like, oh, there are false rape charges everywhere. These girls are crazy. If you just hit on a girl in public, you're going to be prosecuted.
Hashtag me too.
Yeah, and then I went out and I did mode 1 with like 50 girls in the span of like 2 months.
Maybe quickly these guys may not know what mode 1 is. If you can give them like a quick sentence
Very,
summary.
very direct game. And I did that and no rape charges, no fallout from it, no drinks thrown in my face, no nothing. And that was kind of jarring because you would think that if you went by what the space was saying at that time, it was a complete fucking minefield. But turns out most people aren't like that. It's just the loud voices.
Yep, almost none. And every one that happens, you'll get televised. So people have this skewed worldview.
So just look at how much press the mattress girl got, for instance.
For the mattress or for that porn she made that reenacted her rape?
Well, both, I guess.
Which, by the
But
way, probably the worst one I've ever seen. Like,
yeah, that was not a good one.
imagine agreeing to that. As the guy, like, how thirsty are you? Hey, this chick that's known for throwing dudes under the bus sexually, yeah, I'll start a porn with you. That's how come thirst will never, like, you're never gonna teach guys to not be thirsty. The guy
I
literally
think
was
that,
walking into a jaw of a rape charge. He's like, sure, I'll do it.
but the point being that it was the same thing with the whole Trump thing on Twitter too. Like there was a lot of Trump in my feed for a long time until I started blocking them.
Mm-hmm.
And what you notice is like this whole disaster thing that they kept going on about, the world wasn't that fucking bad. And even if it was bad, it's not bad in the way they say it's bad. It's bad in a completely different way.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree with that. That's kind of why our advice hasn't changed over the last, what's it now, 3-4 years, however long it's been that we've been brands on the internet, Z-level celebrities or whatever you want to call us. Go try things out. Go try it out. Prove it to me. How do you know this? Like all that the same undercurrent is ignore the social signals, focus on tangible results. I think that's a fair assessment, isn't it?
Yeah, that's essentially it.
And you're right. There's so much autism in the sphere that you get these ham-fisted examples that you can literally use them to discover. Oh, I don't need a Lamborghini and a cam girl shit posting course in order to get laid. Oh, that's crazy. I don't have to have six-pack abs to get laid. I just have to not be grossly obese. Oh, it turns out I don't need to do mystery method absolutely perfectly. And it was just training wheels to get me comfortable around engagement and to escalate. Great. And that, like you said, all these things become social signals and they completely jump the shark. And then as soon as guys start ignoring, and that's why you get the other social signal of guys who get to the point where they get it, they figured it out, and then shitting on the sphere is our social signal now. That's the one we're in. Calling this place autistic is like the new signal of guys that get it.
Hey, my biggest growth on Twitter came after I told people to stop fucking following me.
Oh, that's right. When you
spent months antagonizing people to get them to unfollow.
You were hitting on everything too. Everybody. I hate tradcons. I hate progressives. I hate people who like this. I hate people who like sex. I hate nofap. I hate people who don't know FAP. And everybody's like, oh, I gotta find how this ends. You even changed your Abby to that monstrosity there. They're like, oh, that's much better for Schopenhauer. Perfect.
Now I was going to go back to the old Schopenhauer avatar a while back, but then Red Pill School fucking destroyed using Schopenhauer as your avatar, so I just had to keep this one.
Yeah, well, speaking of which, though, speaking of social signaling, that was the greatest example, I thought, in the recent year or two when Trump had that huge, like, conservative purge ban, which wasn't really a purge ban. It was people that were goading Twitter. Like, I dare you to ban me so I can show that I'm beat up by the liberals, and you can stick it to them by buying my book. And then a whole bunch of people got kicked off for that. And then a whole bunch of people who didn't get kicked off for that kind of got insulted. So they deleted their accounts to show solidarity. I'm like, oh, what a lazy signal. The progressives won't even block me from Twitter, so I'm blocking myself. Buy my book. I'm like, you lazy motherfuckers. That's like stolen valor for internet fame. I'm just saying.
Yeah, but then you have to kind of look at that became its own thing. And I think that's why Milo ended up actually getting banned. It was just because he kept pushing and pushing, because the more he got banned and the more the left went off on him,
the more popular he got.
Yeah, the more, because the people who he was trying to appeal to weren't like the left. And that's why I've said, like, debate is, there's no point in having a debate, because a debate is essentially, it has become a way for both participants to signal their in-group. Mm-hmm. It's like Rollo's thing with, yeah, I'll debate Stedman, but as long as the topic isn't Rollo as a cult leader.
And that's a very reasonable, rational way to describe it. It's very surface level. It signals to the kind of people who just want to see interesting people, and I'm using Stedman with quotes there, talk about topics that they're engaged in. But Stedman's side was just showing that he's taken on Goliath with his slingshot of MBTI nonsense.
Yeah, I think that's why I think Joe Rogan caught on as much as he did, because the way of, he was doing like long form conversations instead of, there has to be a winner and a loser. He was doing like, let's both be winners.
Mm-hmm. I'll push back if something sounds silly, and I'll listen to you if something normally doesn't get listened to, and I don't fall for all the people. It's the people that are tired and they just want unity in the sphere are the kind of ones that like Joe Rogan. Speaking of social signaling there, can we talk about that one or no? Or should
Yeah,
we?
we can. But the whole thing with unity in the sphere is that it's kind of a British fallacy. It's a fallacy of moderation, where when you use the argument with a girl, like, okay, but just the tip, it's kind of the same thing. But you can't have you can't come to a reasonable compromise if on one end my view is let's stop killing people, and your position is I want to kill people, and a reasonable middle position there is okay, you still get to kill some people.
Yeah, manslaughter, not first degree.
That's not a reasonable compromise. And a lot of the time, that's where you end up because the positions are too far apart. And that's why you kind of notice this kind of, let's say, finger fucking when you hear Christians debate.
Oh, yeah.
Because they kind of shift their way between different types of Christian, all depending on what position they're arguing at that point. So when they're
almost like arguing with a woman.
So if they're arguing like the first mover argument, that's an argument that doesn't necessarily, it just says that there is something that caused the first thing. That's not an argument for God as the Christian God or the Hindu God or the Muslim God or any of the other ones.
That's the watchmaker one. He said it and just set it and forget it.
No, it's called the first mover argument. It's essentially saying that for every cause, for everything we know to exist, something put it into existence.
Okay.
But what is that first thing? The biggest problem with the first mover is that it's an ad hoc exception, essentially, or infinite regression. Because okay, but who made that? Who made that? Who made that? And just end up.
Created the Big Bang. Well, time didn't exist before that. Well, who created the concept of time? And you're like, yeah, there's no. It's a gap argument. It's I don't know the answer to this, so it's God.
Yeah, it's God of the gaps. But the whole thing with and it's the same thing in debates when people shift between positions like that. There are just too many shady ways to fuck around in a debate to make it an actually good tool.
Yeah. And because audiences aren't savvy enough to pick up on it either and reinforce sticking to the point.
And you're also not going to be able to pick out things like if someone's cherry picking data, if someone's lying, you're not going to be able to call that in normal speed.
No, but even if the guy's a great subject matter, there's the reason why that saying that bullshit is able to go around the world before the truth is able to tie its shoes. And that's one of the debate tactics. Just throw so much bullshit that by the time the guy refused the first point, you're already 6 points later. And now it just looks like somebody who's very knowledgeable about a subject running his mouth versus a guy stammering over point one.
Yeah, and it's also like when you start to break things down, it's much easier to be. I worked with a guy. He used to say that the dangerous people aren't the people with a lot of knowledge or the people with no knowledge. It's the people that have a little bit of knowledge but think they have a lot. Because you get the Dunning-Kruger effect.
Yeah. Because they don't know what they don't know, so they have an unnatural confidence about it. And signaling works great on that.
But I would say my biggest issue with debate as a format is just that it's thoroughly impossible to fact check.
And even
you just can't. And you can't take something like cherry picking.
Right.
You can, let's say you wanted to argue that, I'm just trying to find a good example of it.
Let's use like a manosphere example where all women are like that versus all women are not like that. And then the AWOL people will cherry pick divorce statistics and the I'm not happy reasons for it. And then the not all women are like that people will talk about their parents who have a 50-year marriage and they've been high school sweethearts and they were their firsts. Great example. I think
that's to kind of take that back to the mattress girl signaling. Mm-hmm. The whole reason why that works as a signal is that it's extremely memorable. And once you have those really, really good anecdotal examples that aren't backed by statistics, the anecdote will always do better than the statistic.
Yeah, especially if it's counterintuitive. because the narrative always makes sense, because the story makes sense. But a counterintuitive fact, it doesn't click because it doesn't jive with the way we normally think about things, even if we've proven it to be the case.
That's why I thought like Carl Hart's new book was hilarious.
How
Not sure
so?
if we talked about that. Well, he came out with this book. It's called Drug Use for Grown-Ups, and he's like one of the world's top researchers in psychopharmacology.
Mm-hmm.
He's a tenured professor at Columbia, and he has a very impressive CV. He also uses heroin recreationally.
Oh, that guy. Yeah.
Yeah, and the whole reason why that example works is because it's so memorable. It's a black guy with dreads who's also a university
Not like
professor.
the other guys.
Yeah. So he has all these kind of fun contradictions in his life. So that's a memorable example.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with whenever you need to signal hard, you need that anecdotal example to use.
It's something that people anchors himself with. It's the same reason you need Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, because he's the everyman that you can kind of associate with and bond with. It's a very standard storytelling trope. You have to have it.
Yeah, and because most people aren't going to sit down and find research. But I think what needs to happen to our public debate is just that you need to be able to signal facts much harder than you signal bullshit.
Mm-hmm. But we aren't wired that way, though. It's not going to happen. And that's why I argue we shouldn't even be trying debate right now. What do you do outside of debate? Like, what do you do in lack of debate if you wanted to have the same outcome a debate would have, enlightening the audience?
I would use either Joe Rogan type conversations, or I would say that you need to do it in writing, long form content.
See, I argue you got to use female tools with male sensibilities. It's the kind of the way I phrased it. Girls have all these goopy girl tricks like branch swinging, keeping orbiters around, all that stuff they do. So many things the sphere has learned that have worked really well for men is just taking some female strategy that they do on instinct and then having guys do it, but do it better and with male sensibilities. I'll use dread as an example. Dread is essentially a branch swing. If you guys don't know what branch swing means, you like when monkeys would swing in the trees, they don't let go of the branch they have until they have a new branch, referring to like you don't let go of the man you have now until you have a new husband lined up. Dread is that for guys, but as an olive branch. Like we're still attached to the girl we're with. So if she starts acting right, then yeah, you can always just stick around with her, as opposed to a girl. She'll automatically, like she falls out of love with you in the next 6 months or monkey branching, and she doesn't even care to win you back. And to put it back to the point here of how we get these things debates work, and I've made this case with Illimitable Man back when he did his monetization of the manosphere argument. People are going to do this branding thing. People are going to cherry pick data. People are going to use anecdotes. People are going to be absolutely ridiculous because social signals matter more than. And I think the argument is if you can't beat them, join them. Use these same red meat type things, the same branding exercises, but you just actually put proper content in there as best you can.
Yeah,
now, I don't know if I'm right or you're right. I really don't.
No, I think you're right. I think you kind of have to go that way. You just have to use their tool for the common good.
Yeah.
And that's why I think the whole thing I think the fun fallout after COVID is going to be the trust in medical institutions between the countries that had competent medical professionals and the ones who didn't.
Ooh. I'm curious, do you have a list on this? I think you're more knowledgeable than me. I've only ever focused on Canada and then the States because they keep shoving it down my throat.
I don't have any statistics on it. I just know the overall COVID data, and I get like a lot of international news feeds and everything. So yeah, I tried the whole thing cutting back on reading news. It didn't work. Kind of a news junkie. But anyway, when you go back to it, you're going to have the countries that think the pandemic was well handled by the medical field and the medical professionals, and those who don't. And it's going to be interesting to see how that affects patient behavior.
Well, here's my question. How did the Halliburton Blackwater war against terror thing, how did that affect people's trust in the military industrial complex? I think it's going to be a pretty similar parallel here.
Well, what happened with that? Did it lower the trust in the military, or did it increase it?
Yeah,
Or
I think
what
it did.
happened?
I think it completely did. It lost trust in government and military and private companies, and I'd argue Occupy Wall Street wouldn't have happened if there wasn't Assange's video of like Blackwater troops killing Afghanis in a village. Like you need that lack of trust in order to start, fighting against a system.
Because that's been one of the major arguments in the U.S. now in the Senate about decriminalizing or ending the war on drugs. Has been about that specific thing too. That um, it's destroying the trust in police forces,
Right.
and it's creating a situation where a large proportion of the population uh, hate the police, which affects a lot of different things. But one of the main things is that, for let's say someone overdoses and you don't have a good Samaritan law,
Mm-hmm.
and the police show up along with the ambulance, are you going to call the ambulance? It's the same thing. You don't want to be the guy who's at a huge party where people are doing like party drugs, and then someone gets too fucked up. You don't want to be the guy who calls the ambulance and the cops show up. So that's been the kind of the argument that bad policy destroys the trust in the institutions responsible for that policy and for the state and the quote unquote tribe as a whole.
Right.
So I think that's kind of the argument here, that if you see, you can tolerate a certain loss of trust in certain institutions, but medical is one of those where you need to have high trust.
I agree.
And
You have to.
also in general, if you look at, you started the show saying that you wanted to kick Dougie and Justin out.
Yeah. For no
And
reason other than just a signal, because I'm pretty sure anybody in that position would have done the same stupidity.
and the whole point here is that because they haven't done their job either, because they're not supposed to let the medical professionals have the wheel. They're supposed to be in the car with the medical professionals, but the politicians need to be fucking driving.
Yeah, exactly. But that's the problem, is that they don't want to be accountable for the solution, because if they pick wrong, they get voted out of office. And so it's much easier to defer it to them. And now it becomes medical professionals. Like it's a vague other. It's almost like saying, what would Jesus do? What would doctors do? 5 out of 6 doctors think you should smoke, Philip Morris cigarettes and not the Marlboros.
Yeah, I think that's one of those things that lead to, let's say, social unrest. Because, like when I think it was Andrea just said that I'm describing Italy, and I think I'm describing most countries right now, because we're having one of those new trends where people aren't nearly as trusting of institutions anymore, specifically because it's become very easy to broadcast when institutions fail.
Right.
Because
And not just that, the response of institutions has never been about the trust. They always like hide it or defer it, or I'd say the response has been more damaging than the actual fuck ups.
yeah, like you have a lot of examples of that. Like, let's say you've made the major mistake, but instead of being like, yeah, we own it, we fucked up, they hide it and then they conceal it, and maybe they even keep making the same mistake over and over again. And then suddenly the dam breaks, and now it's like, okay, so you've been fucking up for 15 years.
Exactly. And I don't know of a solution to this, because that's the problem, is that every mechanism we have that kind of creates these situations is something that's hard boiled into us. It's like Andrea was talking before about how conservatives aren't creative because they're not open to, according to the big 5, they're not open to new experiences. They're not generally creative, and they're more conscientious, I think is how it is worded. Correct me if
Yeah, I
I'm
think
wrong
that's
there.
the one.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's something that's hardwired into somebody. As far as I understand, the big 5, psychology wise, these aren't traits you can fix or change over time. It's kind of built into your biology. And so until we can change that, it's just going to be a case where X amount of people are always going to try and say no to everything. X amount of people are going to randomly defer to an authority. X amount of people are going to care more about social signaling than causing real harm. And it's just, how do you get through? It's like the same thing as the drug needles, but instead of, heroin users, you got idiots. How do you still go forward knowing that these amount of idiots are going to exist and still have a good enough outcome? And I don't think there is a solution. I think it's just kind of you plowed along, and then through some kind of evolutionary process, we're either going to figure it out or we're going to die off. Maybe it is that the Faraday paradox or Fermi paradox. Yeah, maybe that's the great firewall for humanity. Mm.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting thing to think about because you kind of see that in the sphere too, because you can see who are the most conservative ones, who are the most liberal ones. You can kind of tell from their feeds.
Yeah, 100%.
And there's nothing really wrong with being risk averse and conscientious and all those things. It's just a bit of an issue when a policy is doing damage. And I think what you ultimately need is a mechanism to place blame.
Which
and
the
have
communists were
accountability.
absolutely great for in the 80s. Blame the communists for everything bad, and everybody was on the same page. I don't like you, you don't like me, but we really don't like the commies. So let's do this stuff together.
Oh, I don't
Which
mean like
Starship
that.
Troopers was kind of right.
I don't mean in that way. I mean more that a lot of the time, let's say you have a great institutional failure. Where
Okay.
are the people who were involved? Like Oliver North helped fund the Contras in Iran and ran for president like 4 years later.
It's a fairly good point.
And you kind of have to bring that accountability where, okay, if let's say you conservatives who say no to everything want to keep this bad policy, then you have to accept that here you have to accept the fallout and you actually have to be held personally accountable for it. Because it's very easy to, we had the same thing with the Nuremberg trials after the Great War.
Right.
Where the whole thing was for a long time that, oh yeah, but the average German didn't know about the death camps. The average German wasn't involved with the Nazi party. But you have to be a bit honest. A lot of them knew.
Listen,
because the rumors were spreading. So it was more of a case of, yeah, they're not accountable in that they did it, but they didn't object to it. And there should be some kind of accountability mechanism. And here, that was a lot of fines that Germany had to pay and restitutions and so on.
mm-hmm.
And I think that would be a good way of managing it in a society too. That, okay, if you as a public, let's say Justin, he has 3 of these, what they call disciplinary things.
Yeah, ethics violations.
Yeah. Okay, at that point, hold him criminally responsible and put him in jail. Same thing I had with Wall Street bankers during the financial crisis. Why didn't they walk down Wall Street and just cuff everyone?
Yeah. I agree that'd be good, but that's the problem. Everybody in the Liberal Party of Canada don't want to do that because right now he's the figurehead. He's the most popular guy in the party. And even though Canada doesn't actually elect a prime minister, we elect members of parliament, and whoever has the most members of parliament elects their own prime minister, hence prime minister. But they don't want to do that because then they're going to lose their most popular candidate. So they're more incentivized not to do this. The Conservatives would love to do that, but they don't have a majority in the party, so they can't do it.
Well, it's the same thing with the U.S., where Mitch McConnell is like, yeah, Trump is culpable, but he's not guilty, and I'm going to support him if he runs for president in 2024.
Yeah, so the incentives just aren't aligned there. And Canada has it even easier. They could literally tomorrow, the Liberal Party of Canada can get together and say, we're going to put this guy in charge. Justin's out 30 minutes later. Like, that's literally the kind of power the party has over who gets to be the prime minister. It's never been done, but it could. And heck, the Conservatives, the NDP, and the Bloc Québécois could get together and say, we're going to form a coalition government, and this guy's in charge. Justin, you're out. And they could do that tomorrow too. No election, nothing. But again, we just don't do these things. We could, but we don't.
Yeah, but I think it's ultimately comes back to that nobody wants to really be accountable. It kind of goes back to, the whole thing that women want rights without accountability.
Yeah.
Everyone wants rights without accountability.
I'll say men being raised as defective women only because I say it all the time, but you're probably right in that it's a human quality. It's just easy to point at the girls and say it because we don't care about guys because we're not fucking guys. But sure.
And it's kind of like you see that in the public sector. Like, when was the last time a public employee got fired? Or you even see it in the private sector. Some high-flying CEO gets fired for fucking up a company, gets a new CEO gig 10 minutes later.
Yeah. The only time I've ever seen anybody fired with any amount of permanence now is like Me Too allegations. We just lost our chief of defense staff based on this. First naval one we've had in like 50 years. I guess he turned Uncle Touchy a little too hard, and they're like, "Yeah, you're out." Or our governor general, our queen liaison. Yeah, she pulled a Karen on the staff. She's out. Not a single one of them gave a shit about any of their like career or duties. They could fuck up at their job all day. Just don't make us look bad socially. That's how much abundance we got now, man. We can literally like whatever, put anybody in the position as long as they're a nice guy.
I think it's kind of the luxury good, though. And I think that's kind of what we've been like the whole social. I could go on about this topic for another 2 fucking hours, but I think most policy is just based on social signaling. And you kind of see that very good. I think the abortion one is great because no one wants to say that they're, anti-rights, and no one wants to, because everyone wants to be like the positive one. So you're pro-life or you're pro-liberty. So both sides are for, but they're for different things.
Exactly.
It's the same thing that what's it called? The sobriety organizations.
Oh, like MAD? Fuck those guys.
Yeah. So organizations like they're kind of signaling that, their end goal is that everyone stay sober. That's their goal. Pure and simple, but they never say that anymore.
Nope.
Like no one's going to come out and say, yeah, we should re-ban alcohol, even though that's what they secretly want to do.
No, they have to dance around it and like make it so it's essentially like de facto banned?
Yeah.
Is that the right one, or is it the other one? I always get these ones wrong. There's de facto and de jure, I think, isn't it?
Yeah.
Which is the one that I'm trying to say? De facto banned?
De facto just means that it's in practice banned. It doesn't have to be legally banned.
Right. So yeah, it's de facto banned by making it illegal to have a blood alcohol content, zero tolerance in cars. You can't have a drink except for with that. And they make the licensing so restrictive that nobody can serve alcohol. So it's de facto banned, but it's not actually banned.
Yeah, it's the same thing they've been doing with abortion in a bunch of southern states. Yeah, abortions are legal, but they just refuse to let Planned Parenthood be in the state somehow. They refuse them licensing or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Starve the beast policies, same thing. Oh yeah, we can have all these things. We're just not going to fund them.
So it's a way for politicians to say, yeah, we're doing something about this, but it's not going to work. It's the same thing with... I saw an argument here about, we should, the people who are heavily addicted to heroin should not get fines or should not be harassed by the police. And that's something everyone can kind of get behind.
Mm-hmm.
But if you define the group so narrow that no one fits into it, then it looks like you did something, but you didn't really do anything.
There's that social signaling. What a great... I guess we should end the episode on there. I'm going to go have some breakfast. I think Troy's doing Rule 0. I don't know if you're going to have time to be there or not, but...
What's the topic today?
The topic
is
the new normal of the dating world.
Oh, what's the new normal of the dating world now? You have to date during lockdown. You only have to fuck the girl doggy style, so there's no risk of transmission. You have to do oral sex while wearing a mask.
Yeah, thottery is running rampant. Hoes ain't loyal. The social signal.
To be honest, let's be honest. We should end on those if you can do another 10 minutes.
Yeah, sure, whatever.
Because that's kind of like the most annoying social signal in the space for me, because we've been saying like, oh, it's a new day for hosts. They're not loyal anymore. They're thotting it up. They're running around taking cocks every which way.
The dating game has changed this year.
Yeah, we've been saying that shit for 20 years now. Can we please stop? Like, the only thing that changes are how blazing they are.
Just the flavor
how
of
much they're thottering.
And they were still blazing in the 90s and 2000s. They were just as brazen about it. It's just that there's no social media to amplify it.
But the whole
thottery isn't getting worse. It's getting filmed.
But yeah, exactly. And it's kind of the reason why it pisses me off so much is that it kind of creates this fear and this problem so that someone can sell you the solution, which is always like, join my community, buy my book, support me on Patreon so I can buy more ugly fucking pink shirts. It's always like that angle on it. And
I can't help but think that's a slight. By the way, this is just striped red with red and lighter red. It's not
it
pink.
looks really pink on cam.
Well, that's because I got some filters on my camera right now to make it look more presentable and saturated. So
But
I'm
anyway,
understandable. I got a
the whole
signal.
point was just like be aware of those signals too, because you're never going to get laid if you keep social signaling.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I agree. Girls are actually hardwired to detect cheap social signals, and they're hardwired to fall for expensive social signals. That's why lifting is great. You can't fake muscles. The best you can do is that, you know, that position where everybody does this with their hands underneath to make their biceps look bigger. That's about as close as you're going to get to socially signaling a muscular body.
That and imaginary lat syndrome.
Oh yeah, look at them hauling the paint cans. We used to love that one in the military.
And then you have that whole thing with guys wear t-shirts one size too small so they look like they're really jacked.
But yeah, that's it. Expense, and that's honestly, it's what you and I and a few other, and like a lot of the Rule Zero guys have been saying since the start. Like, you can't fake muscles. You can't fake game. You can't fake social savvy. Like, you actually have to do it. You have to work at it. You have to put in some effort. And it's the expense of that signal that makes it valuable, not so much that it's a tip and a trick. It's the big difference that pickup artists kind of figured out. It's like, why are we faking this stuff so hard when I can just do it? It's probably less effort.
Yeah, that, and we have to keep in mind that, you know, we have two types of guys in the manosphere. There were the people who were sitting there saying that we should storm the Capitol, we should storm the Capitol. And then you had that one retard who didn't realize it was social signaling who actually stormed the Capitol, and that shit gets expensive.
Yeah. Oh, very expensive. His life goal to take his brand new family to Poland and live forever just shot up in a heartbeat. But hey, you got 100 followers on Twitter, so I guess that's what matters.
Yeah, and that's what happens when you fall for false social signaling.
Dude, if that's not like a perfect metaphor for everything we've just been talking about for signaling, I don't know what is. Stedman is finally providing some value to the sphere. There's something we can debate.
Yeah, that's why I took that example. But that was basically what I had to say on it, so we can probably end there.
All right. Thanks, guys. Gendernomics, fuck files in the description. Thanks for sticking around. And I don't care if the shirt's pink. I'm a darker skinned guy. We wear pink.